The world was colder then. Not the kind of cold we know today, the brief sting of winter air, the frost that fades with dawn, but a deep, unyielding cold that shaped the bones of the land itself. Ice stretched like glass across valleys, and mountains wore crowns of snow that never melted. In the dim light of an endless twilight, the wind swept over frozen plains where mammoths moved like slow shadows, and herds of woolly rhinoceros carved paths through the silence. Among that quiet world lived them, the Neanderthals. In a cave at the edge of what we now call Europe, a small fire flickered, painting the stone walls with restless light. The air smelled of smoke, pine resin, and damp earth. Around the flame, figures gathered, broad-shouldered, thick-limbed, wrapped in hides stitched with sinew. They spoke to one another in a language lost to time, a rhythm of breath and tone that no living ear has ever heard. Yet it was a language all the same, shaped by the same need that still binds us, to share warmth, to make meaning, to belong. Their faces were familiar, yet strange. The heavy brow ridges, wide noses, and powerful jaws gave them an air of strength, but in the glow of the fire, their eyes softened. One of them, a mother, hummed softly as she traced her child's hand against the cave wall, leaving behind the faint print of ochre pigment. Another sharpened a flint point, each strike of stone against stone echoing in the chamber like a slow heartbeat. These were not beasts, as once imagined. They were people. For more than a century, science painted them as brutish and slow, a side branch of humanity destined to vanish. But the bones told a different story. Archaeologists found pigments, beads carved from shells, feathers used as ornament. They found the ashes of hearths that had burned in the same spots for generations. They found flowers placed in graves, suggesting care for the dead. Evidence not of beasts, but of minds capable of tenderness and memory. Their world was smaller, but no less meaningful. By the time our species, Homo sapiens, walked out of Africa some 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals had already thrived in Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years. They had endured ice and famine, learned the secrets of fire, shaped tools with a precision unmatched by any other creature of the age. Their hands were thick and calloused, yet steady enough to knap flint into perfect edges, to cut hide and carve bone. Their eyes, adapted to dim light, could read the landscape like a book, where the wind funneled through valleys, where herds would cross, where danger slept in shadow. Their minds were molded by survival, but not without imagination. In the deepest chambers of caves, beyond the reach of daylight, traces of red pigment still cling to stone. Some of these marks predate the arrival of modern humans, suggesting that Neanderthals themselves may have been the first to leave art upon the world's walls. Perhaps those handprints were a declaration of existence, a quiet message through time. We were here. Outside, the snow fell in slow spirals, dusting the entrance of the cave. The fire crackled lower, and the tribe drew closer together. Their lives were fragile, bound to the rhythms of the earth. Every hunt was a risk, every winter a test. Yet they endured, not as savages, but as caretakers of each other. When a child was born, the group shared its care. When a hunter was injured, others brought food until he could walk again. When one of them died, they did not abandon the body to scavengers. They buried it with tools, and sometimes with flowers. In their silence, there was empathy. For thousands of generations, this world of ice and fire was theirs alone. Then, something changed. Far to the south, another kind of human had begun its long migration. Leaner, more lightly built, their skulls rounder, their faces finer. They carried new tools, needles of bone, blades of obsidian, art that danced in color. They carried also something invisible, language shaped into symbols and perhaps imagination that reached beyond survival. When these two worlds met, ours and theirs, it was not in war, at least not at first. The evidence suggests encounters were scattered, spread across centuries, a tool left beside another, a hearth that bore both kinds of stonework. DNA, preserved in the marrow of ancient bones, tells the rest of the story. They met, they shared food, and sometimes they shared love. Many of us still carry traces of their blood, too, sometimes 3% of Neanderthal ancestry flowing quietly in our veins. We are their descendants as much as we are their replacements. Yet, something tipped the balance. The climate warmed, forests receded, hunting grounds shifted. Their numbers, always small, began to dwindle. Ours multiplied. Their fires burned fewer and farther between, until only ashes remained. And so, the last Neanderthals disappeared. Not in a single night, not in a final battle, but in a long, slow fading. The youngest bones we've found rest in a cave in southern Spain, dated to around 40,000 years ago. After that, silence. The kind of silence that outlives memory. Imagine standing there in that final moment, the wind howling across empty plains, the stars sharp above the frozen horizon, a lone figure tending to a dying flame, unaware that they are the last of their kind. The fire hisses, the coals dim, and in that fading light, a question lingers in the air. What if they had survived? What if their story had continued and ours had ended? Would the world have grown more patient, less restless? Would their calm endurance have shaped a gentler civilization? Would the forest still stand where our cities now rise? These questions cannot be answered, but they remind us that history is not a straight line. It is a fragile thread, spun from chance and survival. One shift in climate, one spark of disease, one storm too harsh, and the story might have been reversed. We like to think we are the destined victors of evolution, the inevitable outcome of nature's grand design. But the bones beneath our feet tell another tale, that we were not stronger, only luckier. That intelligence alone does not guarantee survival, and that extinction is not failure. It is simply the end of a chapter. The Neanderthals were not the rough draft of humanity. They were another version of it. Their minds were shaped by ice, ours by sun. They lived close to the land, we rose above it. They built fires to endure the cold. We built cities to conquer it. Yet, in the quiet between heartbeats, their story still whispers through time. When we kneel beside a fire, when we hold a child's hand, when we grieve and remember, we speak a language they might have understood. The cave still stands in the limestone hills of Europe. Its walls are cold, but if you run your fingers across the stone, you might find the faint outline of a hand, painted in ochre more than 40,000 years ago. The pigment has faded, but not vanished. It waits there in the dark, patient as the earth itself. Perhaps that is their true legacy. Not conquest, not invention, but endurance. To live through the unthinkable. To care for one another in the shadows. To make beauty, even when the world offered none. And so, as the last sparks fade from the fire and the night reclaims the cave, we are left with a quiet thought. Perhaps it was only chance that chose who dreamed the world awake. Long before their bones were brushed from the earth, before the museums and the microscopes and the quiet hum of laboratory lights, Neanderthals lived as flesh and breath, as families, hunters, lovers and mourners. Yet for nearly 2 centuries after their rediscovery, the story told about them was one of shadows. The first skull was found in 1856, in a limestone quarry near Düsseldorf, in a valley called Neanderthal, the Neander Valley. It was a strange, heavy-browed skull, thick and ancient, and the men who found it could not imagine that it had once belonged to a human being. When scholars examined it, they called it primitive, brutish, ape-like. A mistake of nature, they thought, an evolutionary dead end. For decades, that image endured. The Neanderthal as a creature of half light, stooped and slow, surviving only by accident in a cruel Ice Age world. In textbooks, they were drawn with sloping shoulders and vacant stares, grunting in caves while the bright, upright Homo sapiens strode toward destiny. It was a convenient mirror, one that made us feel chosen, even noble, but mirrors can lie. Today, under the lens of modern science, the Neanderthals emerge as something else entirely, not monsters of prehistory, but a different expression of humanity. In their bones and tools, in the DNA curled inside their fossils, we see a reflection of ourselves. Archaeologists like Professor Jean-Jacques Hublin at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology have helped rewrite that story. Through decades of study, from the caves of La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France to Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the evidence has become clear. The Neanderthals were not less human. They were simply another kind of human. Their anatomy was shaped by the cold, their bodies dense and powerful, built to conserve warmth and endure the hunt. Shorter limbs, barrel chests, strong hands capable of gripping stone and spear through endless winters. Their skulls were larger than ours on average, their brains as big, sometimes bigger. But their intelligence expressed itself differently. Less abstract, perhaps, more tactile, more bound to the world they touched and saw. Imagine them now, not as museum reconstructions under sterile light, but alive. A small group crossing a snowy ridge, their breath rising in clouds. One pauses to study a herd in the distance. He plans not in words, but in images and gestures, a choreography of understanding. Another hums softly, steadying her rhythm before a throw. When the stone-tipped spear strikes, it's not just muscle that guides it, but memory, generations of trial and pattern encoded in their minds. Inside their caves, they lit fires in the same hollows for centuries. Archaeologists have found stacked hearths, layer upon layer, like pages of an unspoken history. The smell of smoke would have clung to their hides, their hair, their tools. Sparks danced against the stone walls, illuminating pigments, red ochre, black manganese, that they ground and stored. For years, the idea that Neanderthals used pigment was dismissed as accident. But then came discoveries at sites like Cueva de los Aviones in Spain, where perforated shells stained with colour, perhaps once strung as beads, date back more than 115,000 years. That's tens of thousands of years before modern humans reached Europe. The conclusion was inescapable. They painted themselves. They made jewellery. They cared how they appeared. And perhaps they sang. Archaeologists studying a Neanderthal hyoid bone, a delicate bone in the throat that supports speech, found it nearly identical to our own. Combined with the structure of their inner ears, this suggests that they possess the physical ability to speak, to shape sound into meaning. We don't know what their words were, or if they spoke in tones, clicks, or whispers, but the air that moved through their throats may have carried songs. In the cave of Bruniquel, in southern France, deep beyond the reach of sunlight, explorers discovered something astonishing. A ring of broken stalagmites arranged by hand, dating back roughly 175,000 years. It was built by Neanderthals, long before our species arrived. No one knows why they made it. Some think it was ritual, others shelter. But the simple fact remains. They entered the darkness with fire, and they built. Even their graves speak of tenderness. In Shanidar Cave, high in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, archaeologists led by Ralph Selecki in the 1950s uncovered the remains of at least 10 Neanderthals. One of them, known today as Shanidar 4, was found surrounded by ancient pollen grains. Some believed flowers had been laid upon his body. Later analyses debated the finding, but even if accident rather than ritual, the image endures. A body placed with care, a life mourned. Nearby, another skeleton, Shanidar 1, bore signs of crippling injury. A withered arm, blindness in one eye, likely deafness. Yet he lived for years after his wounds. Others must have fed him, protected him, carried him when he could not walk. Compassion, not competition, kept him alive. In France, at La Chapelle-aux-Saints, the so-called Old Man of the Neanderthals was buried with similar care some 60,000 years ago. His teeth were worn to stubs, his bones arthritic, yet he too survived into old age. No solitary creature could have done that. They lived in communities where weakness was not a death sentence, where empathy had already taken root. Each of these discoveries chipped away at the old caricature when scientists looked deeper still, past bones, into molecules. The truth became impossible to ignore. In 2010, a team led by geneticist Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute mapped the Neanderthal genome. The results stunned the world. Most living humans outside Africa carry between 1% and 3% of Neanderthal DNA. We are, quite literally, their kin. Their genes linger in us, shaping our skin, our immune systems, even our sleep patterns. Fragments of their world still echo in ours. When we shiver, when we crave, when we dream, perhaps something ancient stirs beneath. And yet, for all this closeness, the image of the Neanderthal still flickers between reverence and loss. We see them as reflection and as ghost. The last of them vanished around 40,000 years ago, their caves empty, their tools left where they fell. But through every find, every tooth, every fragment of pigment or bone flute, we uncover a little more of their truth, that humanity did not begin with us. At times, it is almost as though they are reaching out through the soil, asking not for resurrection, but for remembrance. In a quiet museum in Saint-Germain-en-Laye near Paris, the reconstructed skeleton of La Chapelle man stands under soft light. His brow is heavy, his face solemn. To stand before him is to feel both distance and connection, a wordless recognition that this too was human. Professor Hublin once said, When we look at Neanderthals, we are looking in a mirror. We see not another species, but a different way to be human. That mirror is imperfect, its glass clouded by time and prejudice, but each new discovery clears the reflection a little more. They were thinkers, they were makers, they were mourners and dreamers, the sound of stone against stone, the smell of smoke in the cave air, the hush that follows a hunt. These were the rhythms of their world. Their children learned to shape flint by watching the sparks. Their elders told stories by firelight, perhaps of spirits in the wind or memories of the hunt. When the northern lights shimmered across their winter sky, they looked up, just as we do, in silence and wonder. The difference between us and them is not of kind, but of continuation. They ended, we endured, but endurance does not make us better, only luckier. Even now, as the fire of knowledge burns brighter, the old myths fade. No longer the brutish caveman of early imagination, the Neanderthal stands revealed as our sibling, our reflection, the lost mirror in which we glimpse ourselves, both fragile and profound. And in that reflection lies a humbling truth. Humanity has never belonged to a single species. It has always been shared, a chorus of voices, now reduced to one. Listen closely, and you can still hear the faint echo beneath our own speech, a language without words, carried across millennia, the rhythm of a hammerstone, the breath before a song, the pulse of a heart that beat in another chest, long ago, beneath another sky. In their bones we see reflection, not difference. The ice had not yet fully claimed the world, but winter had already taken root in its bones. Across what is now the Near East, the wind carried the smell of smoke and thawing soil. It was a fragile season, one where the rivers began to breathe again, and where two kinds of humans, after 100,000 years apart, would finally see one another in the pale morning light. In the caves of Mount Carmel, not far from the Mediterranean coast, fires glowed like embers in a long, slow dream. The Neanderthals had been here for generations. Hunters who knew the rhythm of the gazelle migrations, the crack of flint against stone, the soft hiss of marrow boiling in a carved bone pot. They had names for the stars, though none survive. They had laughter too, a sound that echoed off limestone walls in a timbre nearly indistinguishable from ours. Their hands were thick, their muscles tuned to cold and endurance, but their eyes held something familiar, the quiet alertness of a mind that wanders. To the south, a different lineage had begun to move northward. Homo sapiens, newcomers from Africa. They were slighter, their tools more delicate, their art more restless. Where the Neanderthals carved strength, we carved possibility. Yet both species looked up at the same stars, both gathered around the same flicker of fire. The earth did not yet know which of them would inherit it. Archaeologists at sites like School and Kafse have uncovered traces of this meeting, bones that seem to blur the line between us and them, skulls that hold the rounded grace of sapiens but the sturdy brows of Neanderthal kin. There are children buried there whose faces no scientist could easily assign to one side of that genetic divide. In their shared DNA, we find the faint signatures of curiosity and of contact. Imagine a dusk long gone, a band of Neanderthals following the spoor of deer into a valley where the grass whispers with new scents. The air carries something foreign, a faint tang of ash from a different fire, a voice pitched just slightly differently in the wind. And then, among the trees, movement. Another figure, upright, cautious. The two groups stare across a stream, their reflections wavering side by side. Not predator and prey, but mirror and echo. What happened next is written only in fragments. The bones tell us of encounters, some violent, some tender. A few skeletons carry the marks of spear wounds, others, the shared shelter of burial. Geneticists have traced the mingling of bloodlines. Today, almost every person outside of Africa carries 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, a small inheritance from that ancient intermingling. The meeting of the species was not a war. It was a slow unfolding, a dance across generations, where exchange was as likely as rivalry. In a cave in Vindija, Croatia, the story whispers from powdery sediment. Scientists have recovered fragments of a woman's genome, a Neanderthal who lived around 40,000 years ago. Within her DNA lies the echo of another lineage. Traces of sapiens' blood, already entwined. By the time she lived, The two species had been interbreeding for thousands of years. The fork in time had already blurred, yet coexistence was never simple. The climate grew harsher. The cold deepened. Resources dwindled. Neanderthals, built for close-range hunting and small kin groups, found themselves in landscapes increasingly dominated by the more adaptable, more numerous sapiens. Our ancestors carried a broader toolkit, more flexible strategies, long-distance trade, symbolic art, new forms of communication. But these advantages were subtle. For tens of millennia, the two species walked side by side through snow and silence, neither yet victorious. It is easy to imagine conflict. Hunters crossing paths at a watering hole, eyes narrowing over a fresh kill. But perhaps just as often, there was curiosity. A glance, an offering, a gesture that bridged the gulf, a shell bead exchanged, a spark shared to light another's fire. Around those flames, language might have faltered, but meaning would have found its way, through mimicry, through laughter, through the universal grammar of survival. Archaeological traces suggest that ideas, too, may have flowed between them. In Neanderthal sites after the arrival of sapiens, we begin to see hints of new tool forms, new pigments, new adornments. Some scholars think this reflects imitation or mutual teaching, a brief flowering of shared ingenuity before the world grew cold again. But within that exchange also lay tension. Neanderthals were fewer, their populations scattered and isolated. We, the newcomers, carried networks that stretched farther, webs of trade and kinship that spanned whole continents. Over time, this difference may have tilted the balance. One lineage began to thrive, the other began to fade. Still, extinction is never a single moment. It's a dimming of light, a slow retreat of voices into silence. The last Neanderthals, in places like Gibraltar and the Pyrenees, held on while the glaciers advanced, their fires flickering in caves that looked out over the sea. They would have watched herds moving differently, the forests changing shape, the sky thick with unfamiliar smoke from new camps beyond the hills. They were not conquered. They were outlasted by time itself. And yet, their story did not truly end. Inside us, fragments of their genome live on, in our skin's ability to adapt to cold, in the immune systems that guard us still. In this sense, the meeting of species was not a vanishing, but an inheritance. The fork in time did not sever the road completely, it braided it. Think of that when you breathe. The air you draw is filtered through lungs shaped by countless ancestors, some of them not quite human in the way we define ourselves. The hair on your arm rises at the touch of cold, an echo of life beneath ice age skies. Even your dreams, perhaps, carry a whisper of theirs. Some nights, in the stillness before sleep, it's easy to imagine how that world once felt. The hush of snow falling on branches, the crackle of resin in the fire, the way shadows stretch along the cave wall. Two families, not enemies not yet, huddled within the same light, each wondering what to make of the other, each seeing, in the other's eyes, something uncannily familiar. Recognition. The scientists of our own age, people like Svante Pääbo, who sequenced the Neanderthal genome, remind us that this meeting wasn't a fleeting accident. It was a union that shaped who we are. Our capacity for empathy, for imagination, for memory itself, may bear traces of that ancient blending. We did not entirely replace them. We became something that included them. And so, the story of that encounter is not tragedy alone. It is the story of two lines converging for a moment in deep time, exchanging more than genes, exchanging possibility. The Neanderthals may have disappeared from the earth, but not from the pattern of our being. Their endurance lives within the architecture of our bodies, their silence within the rhythm of our thoughts. If the balance had shifted, if the climate had been kinder or the numbers reversed, perhaps it would be their descendants now gazing at the stars, telling stories of a vanished cousin called Homo sapiens. But history is a narrow path. One turn, one frost, one chance meeting in a valley, and everything changes. In the end, it was not a battle that decided the future. It was the delicate arithmetic of survival. Who adapted faster, who reached farther, who told the stories that endured. The Neanderthals left us their mark not in monuments or empires, but in something far more enduring, our blood, our bone, our dreams. Tonight, as the world outside grows quiet, imagine that ancient fork in time, the moment when two fires burned side by side in the dark. Their smoke mingled, rose together into the vastness above, indistinguishable as it drifted toward the stars. Perhaps it was always meant to be this way, not one winning, but both remembered. For in the mirror of our DNA, their reflection still flickers, steady, human, and impossibly near. Imagine the Earth turning slightly differently, just enough that the winds carried a little more snow, the summers a little less warmth. The ice sheets, instead of retreating, thickened their gleaming grip on the northern world. The tundra spread farther south, the forests shifting from oak to pine, from green to silver grey. In this colder rhythm of time, it was not us who found the advantage, but them. The Neanderthals, children of frost and shadow, would have endured. They were built for it after all. Their bodies, dense with muscle and warmth, burned energy with the efficiency of a fire banked against the wind. Their chests were broad, lungs deep. Their noses, wide and flaring, warmed each breath against the chill. Where our ancestors might have starved in the lean winters, the Neanderthals' metabolism, honed through hundreds of millennia, would have made survival almost elegant. In this world, the climate bowed to their design. The glaciers grew, and with them, the Neanderthals' dominion expanded. Europe became their cradle once more, but not the bleak and empty place of legend. It was alive with cold beauty, lichen glowing on rock faces, herds of mammoth crossing valleys of mist, the aurora rippling above nights that never truly slept. Across this landscape, small fires flickered like constellations. In each, the descendants of Neanderthals tended their embers, hands steady, eyes reflecting both intelligence and memory. With the cold came clarity. Their world was quieter, and in that silence, thought could deepen. They no longer needed to move as often, their hunting territories stable and generous. Caves that had once been mere shelters became gathering places, repositories of memory. Here, stories would have ripened, not in words alone, but in gesture, in rhythm, in pigment. We know they once painted, perhaps faintly, in ochre and manganese. In this enduring world, those beginnings would have flourished into full art, not just marks, but meaning. Whole cave walls alive with movement, reindeer flowing in endless herds, the curve of the moon mirrored in the eye of a horse, the human hand pressed again and again in red dust to say, "I was here." Their tools too would have evolved. The Levallois technique, that precise preparation of stone cores for sharp flakes, would have become even more refined, perhaps even modular. Bone and antler might have joined flint and obsidian in layered designs. Fire, once a companion, would have become an instrument, used to temper, to shape, to harden. The Neanderthal craftsmen were already meticulous. In this timeline, their patience might have carried them into innovation that rivaled any we achieved, and their voices, the soft murmur that once echoed off cave walls, would have matured into language. The anatomy was already there, a hyoid bone capable of nuanced sound, a brain wired for pattern and memory. In a world where they thrived, those voices would have multiplied into dialects, songs, names for every season and tool and star. Their speech might have carried a deeper rhythm than ours, less hurried, more resonant, a cadence shaped by the breath of cold air and the pulse of endurance. Society would have deepened around hearths and kinship. Their small, close-knit groups, once limited by scarcity, could have grown into larger networks, connected through trade and marriage. Shell beads from the southern coasts might have travelled north. Carved bone figures from icy caves might have journeyed east. And as the generations passed, the Neanderthals' sense of the world, once confined to valleys and rivers, would have widened. Perhaps they would have begun to map the land in memory and myth, marking migration routes not on hide or bark, but in story and song. Over centuries, their culture would have taken on a quiet grandeur, temples not of stone, but of light, the interiors of caverns transformed into sanctuaries of pigment and flame. Music too might have emerged more fully. The bone flutes found in caves like Divje Babe suggest the earliest glimmers of melody. In this world, such instruments would have become common. Imagine the sound, haunting, simple, yet layered with centuries of breath. Their songs might have mimicked the wind, the call of the mammoth, the steady fall of snow. Each note a remembrance, a conversation between generations. Without us to compete for space and food, their population would have grown, slowly, sustainably. They were never creatures of haste. Where we built empires in a few millennia, they would have built continuity. Theirs would be a civilization measured in ice and patience, expanding not through conquest, but through adaptation. Their mastery of stone would have led, eventually, to other materials: bone, ivory, and perhaps metals, once the glaciers receded slightly, and veins of ore emerged in exposed rock. Fire would have guided that discovery too, and they would have learned to bend the earth's minerals to their will, not for war, but for craft. Their spirituality, the quiet reverence already visible in their burials, would have matured as well. They might have developed cosmologies woven from the cycles of cold and warmth, the return of herds, the dance of northern lights. Death to them was never absence but transformation. The pollen found in Neanderthal graves, remnants of flowers placed with the dead, suggests tenderness. In this world, such tenderness might have grown into a philosophy, that all things return to the fire, the frost, the stars, and so the continents would have shifted under their gaze. When the ice eventually began to recede, as it always does, the Neanderthals would have followed it north, reclaiming tundras newly green. Perhaps some of their kind would have crossed into the lands of Siberia and beyond, reaching even the frozen straits that connected to the Americas. There, new cultures might have blossomed beneath the aurora, shaped by the patience of their ancestors and the endurance of cold. Their art would have adapted to the changing earth, carvings of melting glaciers, rivers reborn. Their myths might have remembered the age of frost as a sacred origin, the time when the world was young and silence taught wisdom. Unlike us, they might never have needed to conquer nature because they were born within its discipline. Their civilization would have harmonized with the land rather than rewritten it. And what of us, the sapiens? In this alternate world, perhaps we dwindled, a footnote in the strata of time, our bones found in a few warm valleys, our art fading before theirs ever bloomed. Perhaps we would be their myth, the fragile cousins who once burned too brightly and vanished when the frost returned. In Neanderthal tongues, our name might have meant the ones who dreamed too quickly. Yet their dreaming would not have been small. It would have been deliberate, grounded, ancient. They might have developed astronomy not through measurement, but through intuition. The stars mapped as kin rather than coordinates. They would have watched the heavens in silence, tracking the slow turning of constellations like the breathing of the earth itself. Their calendars would have followed migrations and moonlight, not conquest or kings. By now, in this enduring world, they would still walk among us, not as relics, but as a parallel humanity. Their cities, if such things arose, would likely sit half buried in mountains, carved rather than built. Light and shadow would be their architecture. Smoke from hearths would rise through stone chimneys to join the mist. Their technology might look humble, yet built on centuries of quiet refinement. It would rival ours in subtlety. Machines of bone and pressure, tools of simplicity that never broke the balance of the earth. And when night fell, as it always has, they would still gather around the fire. They would still tell the stories of the long ice, of the ancestors who walked beneath endless skies. The children would fall asleep to the rhythm of snow tapping against stone, to the murmur of voices remembering a time when survival was the greatest art of all. Somewhere, deep in a cave, perhaps an elder would press a hand against the wall, not in farewell, but in gratitude. The mark would dry in ochre, then fade as centuries passed. But in that print would linger the truth of this world that might have been. That endurance, not conquest, was the truest form of triumph. And so, in that colder, quieter branch of time, the Neanderthals endured. They shaped their world with patience, not haste, with understanding, not dominion. Their fire still burns. In that mirror world where the snow never quite melted, where the stars reflected in their eyes long enough to imagine forever. In the flickering warmth of their caves, thought began to take shape. Slow, deliberate, unhurried as the beat of their hearts. To understand how the Neanderthals might have imagined their world, we must first understand how they thought. Their minds were not smaller than ours, nor simpler. In fact, they were often larger. The Neanderthal brain averaged slightly more volume than that of modern humans. But shape, not size, tells the deeper story. In the architecture of their skulls, broad and low, with occipital lobes extending like wings, we find clues to a different kind of intelligence. Their brains may have devoted more space to vision, spatial awareness, and bodily coordination. Where our species leaned toward abstraction, toward language and symbolic synthesis, theirs may have flourished in the realm of the concrete, the seen, the felt. the remembered. They lived in a world of precision, not speculation. Imagine a craftsman seated by the light of a hearth, a flint core resting in his palm. Each strike of the hammerstone is a calculation, but not one expressed in numbers. It is a dialogue between muscle, memory, and mineral. He knows by feel how the rock will fracture. He senses the angle before it happens, anticipates the blade that sleeps within the stone. Modern archaeologists, such as Marie Seresi and David W. Freyer, have studied this intimacy, the exquisite skill of Neanderthal napping. Their tools were not crude improvisations. They were works of logic expressed through touch. This, perhaps, was their mathematics, a geometry of action, the rhythm of tool-making, the sequence of motions, each encoded in memory, refined over generations. Where our ancestors would one day mark symbols on bone to represent ideas, the Neanderthals carried those same ideas in the body itself. Memory lived not on walls or in words, but in hands. Knowledge was muscle deep. If they had endured, their civilization might have remained grounded in this embodied intelligence. Instead of written alphabets, they might have developed mnemonic crafts, patterns carved into stone or woven into hides, where each texture or line called forth a story, a technique, a memory of the hunt. Knowledge would have been felt, not read. Their art too would have reflected this philosophy of touch and closeness. The pigments found in Neanderthal sites, ochres, hematites, bits of manganese dioxide, suggest an affinity for earth tones. In their enduring world, this palette might have evolved into a deep aesthetic of nature. Red for blood and warmth, black for the fertile dark of caves, white for the breath of snow. Their sculptures might not have sought grandeur, but resonance. The curve of an animal's flank carved into the bone, the pattern of wind etched onto slate. Where we use abstraction to distance ourselves from nature, they might have used imitation to draw closer to it. Their spirituality, if given time to bloom, would not have worshipped gods above, but cycles around, the turning of seasons, the rhythm of migration, the shared pulse of life and death. Theirs would have been a faith of continuity, not dominion. It is not fantasy to imagine this. The evidence already hints at reverence. Burials carefully arranged, bodies adorned with flowers and pigment, tools laid beside the dead as offerings. They recognized meaning beyond survival. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal who had lived with severe injuries, a withered arm, a damaged eye, yet survived for years, tended by others. Compassion is one of the oldest sciences of the heart, and they mastered it long before we named it. Their thought was local, sensory, yet profound. They saw the world not as a map to conquer, but as a web to inhabit. In their civilization that might have been, this worldview would have shaped everything, from art to governance, from family to philosophy. Perhaps they would have developed councils of elders who carried knowledge as stories, each recounting the lineage of tools or the songs of rivers. Wisdom would have been inherited through presence, not permanence. Contrast that with us, our restless drive toward abstraction. We turned sound into symbols, symbols into writing, writing into data. We built systems that allowed us to imagine far beyond what we could touch. From that came science, mathematics, cities, but also distance. Distance from the earth, from one another, from the slow rhythm that binds life to its source. In the Neanderthal world, imagination might have taken a different path. Their art could have remained personal, rooted in shared experience rather than individual ambition. Their songs might have been collective, evolving over centuries, never authored in the way we understand. Their architecture, if it emerged, would have been carved into the world, not upon it. Structures of earth and stone, following the shapes of mountains and rivers. Their science, too, would have been a quiet one, an accumulation of precise observation. They already understood fire's moods, the properties of minerals, the movement of herds. In this alternate history, that knowledge could have become systematic, a proto-ecology rather than a proto-physics. They might have measured time not by stars, but by the migration of animals or the flowering of tundra plants. Language, that other measure of mind, would have grown in parallel. Studies of Neanderthal vocal anatomy, the hyoid bone found in Kibara Cave, for instance, suggest they possessed the physical capacity for speech similar to ours. In a surviving Neanderthal civilization, those sounds might have become languages rich in texture, describing subtleties of weather, soil, and scent. that we barely perceive. Perhaps they would have had words for the quality of light on snow, or for the feeling of stone under thawing moss. Words that root thought in sensation rather than theory. If their cognition leaned toward visual and spatial mastery, then their communication might have been more melodic, more rhythmic. They may have used tone and gesture as much as syntax, a hybrid of song and speech that carried emotion as much as information. In this world, their literature might have been oral, sung in long cycles that recorded both history and landscape. The very concept of progress would have meant something different. For them, to advance might have been to deepen, to refine what exists rather than to replace it. Their tools might have changed little across millennia, not out of stagnation, but perfection. What was already elegant needed no revolution. Their art would have matured inward, becoming subtler, more symbolic in ways that spoke through texture and silence rather than spectacle. And yet, such a civilization would not have lacked intellect. Cognitive archaeologists like Thomas Wynne and Frederick Coolidge have shown that Neanderthals possessed working memory and planning capacities nearly equal to ours. They understood sequence, cause, effect, the backbone of reasoning. But they may have processed the world more holistically, perceiving interconnection rather than isolation. Where we dissect, they might have synthesized. Where we analyze, they might have remembered. Their science would not have separated mind from matter, spirit from soil. Their philosophy, born from centuries of endurance, might have taught that wisdom lies not in knowing, but in belonging. Imagine one of their thinkers, not a scholar in robes, but a quiet elder seated by the fire, a child listening beside them. The elder lifts a polished stone, smooth from generations of hands. This, they might say, is the memory of the mountain. It is old enough to have seen the rivers change their course. The child would nod, understanding not metaphor, but truth. To them, the world itself would have been conscious, not in mysticism, but in participation. Their stories might have told of ancestors who became rivers, of winds that remember names, of fire as the first teacher. Their myths would have bound ecology and emotion in one seamless weave, and through this, they would have achieved something our own civilization still struggles to grasp: harmony without stagnation, continuity without tyranny. As centuries passed, their minds, forged in ice and silence, might have produced philosophers of stillness, sculptors of patience, engineers of simplicity. Their great achievements would not rise as monuments of stone, but endure as systems of balance. Forests preserved, migrations respected, lives lived without excess. If we could glimpse that world now, just for a moment, we might see their cities glowing faintly beneath snow, shaped like clusters of lanterns in valleys of frost. We would hear their songs, low and resonant, echoing across time. And we would understand that intelligence does not always ascend. Sometimes it deepens. The Neanderthals' minds were not lost. They were a different kind of light, steadier, closer to the earth. In their hands, knowledge was not a ladder, but a circle, each discovery returning to its source. Their thoughts, born of stone and fire, would have shaped a civilization that measured greatness not by conquest, but by connection. And perhaps, as night fell upon that enduring world, one of them might have looked into the embers and wondered, not what they could take from the world, but how long they could remain a part of it. The wind drifts gently over a plain that never knew cities. No walls rise, no armies march, only quiet fields where firelight glows in the early dusk. In this imagined world, the Neanderthals did not vanish. Their kind endured, not as conquerors or kings, but as patient keepers of a slower, colder earth. It begins with the soil, not the sharp lines of a plough, but the soft turning of earth by hand, heavy, capable fingers pressing seeds into damp loam. For hundreds of thousands of years, they had followed the rhythms of the ice and the migration of herds. But when the cold deepened once more and the forest retreated south, something shifted. In valleys shielded from the winds, they began to plant what they once gathered. Tubers, wild grains, the beginnings of patience. Their bodies were made for endurance, not speed. Their minds, for memory more than ambition. The Neanderthal world grew not by conquest, but by remembrance of seasons, of stories, of where the sun last touched the valley before winter's return. Imagine a Neanderthal village in this alternate age, not of mud walls or marble towers, but of stone and bone, stitched hides stretched over frames of wood. Smoke rises slowly into a pale sky. carrying the scent of roasted roots and pine resin. Children trace shapes in the ash, echoing the ancient symbols once painted deep within caves. Spirals, handprints, and forms half like animals, half like dreams. Their civilization unfolds quietly. They do not build empires, but constellations of kin. Villages gather by rivers and mountain passes, bound by trade of obsidian and ochre, not tribute or tax. There are no palaces, no crowns, only circles of elders who remember how to mend, how to find warmth, how to read the flight of birds before a storm. Archaeologists studying their real remains have always noted the same pattern: cooperation, care, community. In Shanidar Cave, a skeleton was found laid upon a bed of flowers. In this imagined future, that tenderness becomes the foundation of civilization. The Neanderthal mind, so often misunderstood, would shape the world differently, not through speed or innovation alone, but through refinement, the perfection of what already works. Their stone tools, once heavy and deliberate, evolve into instruments of astonishing precision. Blades flake to the thickness of leaves, points balanced for weight and motion. But the pace of change is slow, almost meditative. Centuries pass with small improvements, not from lack of imagination, but from contentment with sufficiency. Our history, the one we know, is marked by hunger for more. More land, more food, more power. Theirs, perhaps, would be marked by balance. The cold had taught them limits. Every fire needed fuel. Every life depended on the health of the forest and the herd. Where Homo sapiens built cities to master nature, Neanderthals might have built sanctuaries to live within it. Picture a settlement beside a frozen river. The homes are half buried in the ground to keep warmth. Above them, carved posts bear simple designs, circles within circles, an ancient motif for the season's return. In the center stands a great hearth. Not a temple, not a seat of rule, but a place where all gather. Around it, they tell the old stories of the spirits in the stone, of ancestors who spoke through firelight. Their rituals are quiet, wordless, often sung in low tones that blend with the wind. Music, for them, is not performance but presence. Flutes, made from bird bones, whisper across the tundra, carrying notes that echo the rhythm of the heart. Would they have discovered writing? Perhaps not in the abstract lines and symbols of our alphabets. Their memory was embodied. Stories held in gesture, pattern, repetition. Their knowledge passed through generations by apprenticeship, not inscription. The potter's hand teaching the next. The hunter showing where the snow hides the track. A culture of continuity, not documentation. Yet invention would still find its way. Fire, metal, and medicine, discovered, refined, shared. The first use of copper and later bronze might still come, not as arms for war, but as tools for craft. Their metallurgy would grow from necessity, not ambition. A small community could fashion blades and ornaments that last generations, each object imbued with personal meaning. Trade, too, would spread, not in caravans protected by soldiers, but in wandering kin groups following the reindeer trails. Across what we know as Europe and Western Asia, networks of exchange would weave together like strands of sinew. Shells from southern coasts, amber from the Baltic, pigments from distant hills, but they would not expand endlessly. Without the restless drive to dominate, their numbers would grow slowly. Forests would remain. Rivers would run clear. There would be no deforestation for empire, no roads cutting through wilderness. The earth, in their keeping, would breathe differently. Anthropologists often describe Neanderthals as having smaller social circles than modern humans, perhaps communities of 30 or 50 individuals. In this world, those intimate circles become the model for society itself. A world of 1,000 tribes, each self-sufficient, bound not by conquest but by kinship and exchange. The great moments of human history, the building of pyramids, the forging of empires, the launch of ships across oceans, might never come. But neither would the ruins, the slaveries, the wars of resource and faith. Their monuments would be songs, their heritage, continuity. Still, even in this gentler timeline, they would not remain frozen in simplicity. Fire and stone have always whispered of more. As the millennia pass, their tools of bone and flint give way to innovations guided by patience. They learn to harness rivers for grinding grain, to shape clay for storage and art. Villages become steady, then permanent. In our world, the rise of agriculture brought surpluses, hierarchies, and states. In theirs, it brings seasons of cooperation, harvest shared equally, food stored communally, and festivals tied not to conquest, but gratitude. The winter gatherings beneath long roofs are filled with rhythm and smoke, drums made from stretched hide, fires casting shadows that dance like spirits along the walls. Perhaps there are no kings, but there are keepers of stories, those who remember when the ice was closer, when the mammoth still roamed the plains. The wisdom of age is their authority, knowledge, not power, their inheritance. Science, too, might take a gentler shape. Instead of inquiry driven by control, it might evolve through observation, a science of harmony. They would study stars not to navigate seas or claim lands, but to understand the rhythm of night and season. Their medicine would grow from empathy and careful watching. Which plants soothe, which wounds heal by time. This does not make them naive. In their quiet way, they would face danger, from beasts, storms, hunger, and the accidents of living. But survival has always been their art, and so they adapt again and again, not with ambition, but with endurance. It is tempting to see this world as idyllic, but it is more human, slower, colder, steadier. Life is still hard, but less lonely. The stars still hold wonder, but no longer promise dominion. Somewhere, thousands of years into this alternate history, a traveller from a distant tribe might walk the mountain paths above what we know as Spain or the Caucasus. He carries a pack of woven reed, a blade polished to a dull silver. Below him stretch valleys dotted with fires, small warm lights scattered across the dark, civilization in another form. He pauses at dusk, watching smoke rise from a distant settlement. He does not think of empires. He thinks of the taste of salt, the memory of home, the stories his grandmother told. In the fading light, he hums a melody that has no beginning and no end. A song passed down longer than any monument could stand. This is the Neanderthal world, enduring, balanced, alive. A civilization that never needed to conquer to survive. A humanity measured not in scale or speed, but in warmth. The kind that glows softly, like embers that never die. And perhaps, if we listen closely enough, that quiet dream still lingers beneath our own history. A reminder that there was another way the world could have turned. A path where strength was not in domination, but in care. A path where the earth remained a home, not a prize. A path where the empires that never were still whisper, in the wind and the stone, of what it means to belong. The air is cold, but not cruel. A wind moves through the pines, carrying the scent of smoke and pine resin, of distant fires scattered across the valley like constellations fallen to earth. Above them, the night unfolds, deep and slow, its ceiling painted with ribbons of green and violet. The aurora drifts across the heavens, and beneath it, a Neanderthal village hums quietly with life. This is their world, not a world of stone cities or roaring engines, but one of breath and rhythm, of sound shaped by the pulse of the earth itself. Here, civilization glows softly, as if aware that too much light could drown the stars. At the edge of a frozen river, a marketplace stirs. It is not grand, no stalls or shouting merchants, but a gathering of kin from far valleys. The ground is covered in woven mats of reed and hide. There are beads carved from bone, tools shaped from flint so fine they catch the faint gleam of the aurora. Hands meet hands. The exchange is quiet, eyes soft with recognition. A woman trades dried berries for a pouch of ochre. A man offers obsidian blades in return for fur dyed in forest greens. Beside them, a child plays with a lump of river clay, shaping it into the roundness of an animal. A mammoth, perhaps, or a bear. Its body marked with the tiny impressions of her fingertips. She hums as she works, and the sound joins the whisper of the wind, the low laughter of adults, the soft crackle of fires. Somewhere, someone begins to play a flute made from the hollow bone of a vulture. The notes rise and fall like the call of birds at dawn, trembling in the frozen air. Music is no longer rare. It has become the pulse of gatherings, a way to speak what words cannot, the first songs of belonging. Their art is not painted on cave walls alone. It lives in movement, in touch, in texture. Clay figures dry beside the hearth. Beads of amber catch the first sunlight through smoke. They decorate tools not for beauty's sake, but for memory. A story of the hunt, a symbol for the turning of seasons. Every shape carries meaning. The spiral carved into a spear shaft marks the path of the stars through the year. The circle on a pendant recalls the sun's brief return after winter's rain. In their world, there is no divide between art and survival, between ritual and routine. Everything is made with reverence, even the act of sharpening a blade. At night, they gather by the central fire. Sparks drift upward, joining the aurora's dance. The elders speak slowly, their words deep and rhythmic. The children lean close, listening to tales older than language itself. Stories of the first dawn, when the sky and the earth were still married, and fire was a gift stolen from the cold. Their myths are gentle, rooted not in dominion, but in gratitude. The spirits they speak of are not distant gods, but presences in the world around them. The river's voice beneath the ice, the mountain's deep patience, the warmth of a mother's hand. The soundscape of their world is a lullaby of balance. The rush of water, the thud of stone on stone, the murmur of wind through fur. No iron screams, no wheels grind. Even silence has weight here. It holds the pulse of 1,000 sleeping hearts. When they work, it is often in groups, synchronized not by command but by rhythm. The tapping of hammers, the scraping of hides, the steady breath of shared effort. The result is not a product but a ritual, a way of belonging. Imagine a morning in this world, mist rising from the river, light breaking through pine needles like shards of amber. A young artisan sits by the water, grinding ochre on a flat stone. Her reflection wavers in the current. Not perfect, but enough. She paints a figure on the bark of a birch tree, a herd of animals moving across the horizon. Her hand trembles slightly, not from cold but from awe. She knows what she paints are not just beasts, but the memory of life itself, the endless returning. Above her, cranes pass, their wings slicing the sky with slow grace. Their calls echo faintly, a music older than humanity, yet perfectly in tune with it. The Neanderthal world breathes in rhythm with the planet. Days follow the pace of the sun, seasons shape the mind. Where we count time in minutes, they measure it in cycles, in migrations, in moons, in the long drift of snow and melt. Their songs mirror that patience. A melody may take hours, its pattern repeating with small, deliberate changes, like waves against the shore. To modern ears, it might sound like silence, but listen closely, and you'd hear the intelligence in its slowness, the understanding that beauty doesn't rush. Anthropologists in our world have found traces of this musical instinct. Flutes in the caves of Geissenklösterle, Germany, over 40,000 years old, shaped by hands that may have belonged to Neanderthals or their early cousins. In this alternate history, that spark becomes tradition. Music becomes lineage. Every tribe has its tones, each note carrying the memory of the land that bore it. They sing to mountains, to the aurora, to the dead, and to the unborn. Now and then, travelers from distant valleys arrive, carrying stories of new constellations, of herds moving further north, of strangers glimpsed beyond the frozen sea. Around the fire, those tales are not met with suspicion, but wonder. Curiosity remains, but it is tender, not hungry. There are no borders in this world. There are distances, vast ones, but no walls. People travel slowly, deliberately, as if aware that each step is part of a larger music. Night after night, they sleep beneath skies we can scarcely imagine. Without the haze of cities, every star burns clear, ancient and intimate. The Milky Way stretches like frost across the heavens, and beneath it the people dream, not of progress or conquest, but of return. Their myths speak of the sky as a mirror. To look upward is to look inward, to see in the constellations the shape of one's own memory. The hunters see herds running among the stars. The mothers see children carried by light. The cosmos is not a mystery to be solved, but a companion to be sung to. In the stillness of night, a mother hums to her child, a melody without words, slow as breathing. The flames cast her face in golden shadow. The snow outside glows faintly blue beneath the aurora. Her lullaby is not about fear or comfort, but continuity. You are part of everything that was, everything that will be. The child drifts to sleep as the wind sighs across the valley. Thousands of miles away, another tribe sees the same lights in the sky. They too sing. The harmony of this world is not uniform. It is woven from countless threads of difference, yet bound by the same pulse. The same firelight flickers on faces that know they belong, not because they rule, but because they remember. And what of us, the listeners from another timeline? As we imagine their world, we feel the quiet ache of contrast. Our cities hum with electricity, our nights glow with restless light. We have learned to drown the dark, to replace silence with signal. We build faster, speak louder, reach further, but the cost is distance from the slow, breathing rhythm that once held us. The Neanderthals, in this imagined endurance, never severed that bond. Their world remains slower, but perhaps deeper. They knew what it meant to listen, not just to each other, but to the world itself. And as the aurora ripples across their sky, we might wonder what they would think of ours. The satellites like faint moving stars, the haze that hides the constellations, the noise that never ends. Perhaps they would pity us, or perhaps they would simply understand, the way one musician hears another struggling to find the right note. For beneath their sky, life goes on, steady, glowing, whole. The fires burn low, the songs fade into quiet breath, and the snow begins to fall again. Somewhere in that stillness, beneath the eternal light of the aurora, a new day waits, not hurried, not loud, but complete, and the earth, ancient and listening, hums with them, a lullaby for all the worlds that might have been. The dream fades, but not completely. The auroras dim, the fires of that alternate world burn low, their light retreating into the long corridors of what might have been. And yet, even as we open our eyes to our own familiar world, the echo of them remains. Not in stone, not in tools buried beneath the loam, but in us. For the Neanderthals, in a way, never truly vanished. Their bones rest in caves from Gibraltar to Siberia, but their breath, their essence, flows still through our veins. Every heartbeat carries a whisper of them, a faint pulse of the ancient world that once was. In 2010, a quiet revelation arrived, not from a cave, but from a laboratory in Leipzig. There, in the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, a team led by Svante Pääbo sequenced the Neanderthal genome. What they discovered sent a tremor through the story of who we are, because the truth was this: we had not replaced them, we had joined them. Across Europe, Asia, and even the distant Pacific, traces of Neanderthal DNA survive, woven into the double helix of modern humans like a ghost melody within a symphony. Between 1 and 2% of the genome of every person of non-African descent comes from Neanderthals. In some populations a little more, in others a little less, enough to remind us that the boundary between them and us was never as clear as we once believed. For tens of thousands of years, we shared not just the same lands, but the same lives. We traded, learned, and, as the genes prove, loved. The children of those meetings carried a heritage both ancient and new, and when the Neanderthals as a people faded, their essence persisted in the bloodlines that followed. It is easy to think of DNA as numbers, code, chemistry, but within it lies poetry, a memory written in the smallest script imaginable, each gene a word, each pairing a phrase, and somewhere among those lines, the Neanderthals speak. They speak in the tone of your skin, the way it freckled to meet the sun, or paled to endure the long winters. They murmur in the resilience of your immune system, shaped by millennia of their battles with Ice Age plagues. Some of their genes still awaken when our bodies face unfamiliar viruses, echoing an ancient vigilance. They breathe in the thickness of hair, in the texture of skin, in the quiet pulse of endurance that once carried them through snow and silence. And maybe, too, they breathe in the mind. For recent studies, by geneticists and neuroscientists alike, hint that the influence of Neanderthal DNA may stretch even into emotion and thought. Fragments of their code have been linked to our sleep cycles, our stress responses, even to how we process sadness or joy. Perhaps in some small way, their calm, their stillness before the world's vastness, lingers in us. A fragment of that steady gaze, that patient rhythm of life beneath a cold sky, may still shape how we dream. Of course, the science is delicate, correlation, not certainty, but as the data grows, the picture becomes clearer. Extinction is rarely absolute. They did not vanish like a candle snuffed out. They became part of the flame that continued to burn. When we imagine the last of them, a family huddled in a cave somewhere near Gibraltar, watching the sea foam glisten beneath a pale moon, It is comforting to remember that they were not truly alone. The children of their children walked on, carrying them silently within. Perhaps that is why their image stirs something deeper than curiosity in us, something close to longing. When we see a sculpted reconstruction of a Neanderthal face, there is recognition, not alienation. The wide eyes, the heavy brow, the softness of expression, they feel familiar, as though we are meeting an ancestor whose voice we half remember. Genetically, that's exactly what we are doing. For the Neanderthals were not a failed species, not a detour on evolution's path, but another branch of the same tree, a branch that curved back into ours. In modern science, this is called introgression, the flow of genes between populations that once stood apart. But in older tongues, perhaps there is a better word for it: mingling, blending, becoming, and so they endure. In the DNA that shapes our faces, in the rhythms of our hearts, in the instincts that rise when the cold wind blows. Some of the genes that allow us to sense temperature, to adapt our metabolism to cold, came from them. When the first Homo sapiens moved northward out of Africa into a world of frost and snow, it was Neanderthal inheritance that helped them endure. Even the way our bodies process fat, the way our immune cells respond to pollen and pathogens, traces of Neanderthal pragmatism guiding us through an alien climate. We are, in truth, a hybrid lineage, a living echo of encounter. The thought softens the boundary of species, of identity itself. It reminds us that history is not a ladder, but a tapestry, woven of many threads, none truly separate. Every one of us carries within a library of forgotten stories. In every cell, an ancient voice whispers, "You are not alone," and yet how easily we forget. For centuries, Neanderthals were painted as brutes, slow, dull, destined to vanish before the brilliance of modern humans. But their presence within our genome tells another story entirely. It says that intelligence, empathy, and creativity were never ours alone, that our survival was not conquest, but communion. Even now, as we sequence DNA and map the deep past in digital light, we are only beginning to understand what it means to carry their code. Some of it helps us still. Some of it burdens us. Certain Neanderthal variants have been linked to greater risk of autoimmune disease, of depression, even of nicotine addiction. Their inheritance is as complex as any human legacy, neither gift nor curse, but the quiet persistence of ancestry. It is tempting to view them as ghosts, but perhaps that is not quite right. Ghosts haunt. The Neanderthals don't. They accompany. In our laughter, our fear, our awe at the natural world, something of their ancient consciousness flickers through. When you stand before a storm and feel a thrill both of beauty and of danger, that blend of reverence and alertness, you may be touching a memory older than words. In our blood, they still breathe beneath the skin of time. The phrase sounds like poetry, but it is also science. In the nucleus of nearly every cell in your body, there are sequences that once lived in theirs, tiny echoes of a genome adapted to an Ice Age world, now repurposed to navigate a digital one. Our technologies change, our bones remember. And so the story of Neanderthals is not just a tale of extinction, it is a meditation on continuity. Every discovery, every fragment of DNA recovered from caves like Vindija or Denisova adds another heartbeat to their afterlife. In the flicker of a fire, in the reflection of your face on a cold window, they are there, not watching, but resonating. The past hums quietly inside us, a frequency too low for most to hear. If you listen at night, when the world is still, you might sense it. The ancient rhythm of breath, the slow, deliberate calm of a people who once watched the same stars we do. Theirs were the same constellations, though they had different names. Perhaps, when they looked upon Orion or the Pleiades, they saw the shapes of mammoths, of family, of journeys remembered by heart. Their vision became ours. Their endurance became our story, and so the question that began as "what if they had won" softens into another. What if they never truly lost? Because in truth, they live on, not as shadows or symbols, but as strands of being. When the human child of today gazes in wonder at the first snowfall, there is something ancient stirring within that awe, a genetic whisper from the ice and the fire. They are not gone, they are transformed, and perhaps, in some quiet, luminous way, they have won after all. For they endure. in the warmth of our hands, in the rhythm of our hearts, in the shared breath that ties us to every ancestor who ever lived beneath the stars. And as the night deepens, and the wind carries the sound of our own breathing, we can almost hear them there, not as ghosts, but as kin, murmuring softly through time, "We are still here. We always were." There is a moment, somewhere deep in the fabric of time, where everything trembles, not because of destiny, but because of chance. Imagine it. A flicker in the ice winds 60,000 years ago. A small tribe of Neanderthals huddled around their fire, their breath mingling with the smoke. Their laughter carried into a night so cold it seemed to hum. To the south, another kind of fire burned, smaller, quicker, carried by humans whose ancestors had crossed from Africa with little more than hope, cunning, and a few precious embers. Between them stretched the world's most delicate balance. Two lines of survival crossing on the same thread. If the wind had shifted differently, perhaps it would have been their world, not ours. The story of how one humanity faded while the other endured is not a tale of superiority, but of accidents, of timing, geography, and fragile luck. The earth herself turned her face, and what followed was less a conquest than a series of quiet misfortunes and brief, improbable survivals. We like to imagine our victory as inevitable, that we were destined to rise, to build, to think, to dream. Yet beneath that comforting myth lies a truer, humbler tale that evolution is a gambler and that every living thing plays with dice carved from chance. The Ice Age was a cruel stage for this unfolding drama. Around 40,000 years ago, the world was growing colder again. Glaciers crept down from the north, swallowing forests, drying rivers, changing the routes of herds that both species depended on. For Neanderthals, who had mastered the rhythm of Europe's ancient winters, this should have been familiar ground. Yet the ice came harder, the seasons more erratic. Small tribes already isolated found themselves trapped between walls of frost. A valley once rich in mammoth and deer could, within a generation, become a barren plain. Starvation spread quietly, not with the roar of catastrophe, but the slow whisper of fewer children, fewer fires. Meanwhile, Homo sapiens, our ancestors, were wanderers by nature. Their range stretched wide, from sunlit coasts to frozen tundras, their numbers growing where Neanderthal bands dwindled. The difference was not strength or intelligence, it was scale and connection. We carried stories, rituals, songs that bound us across distance. A hunter who learned a trick in one valley could pass it to another hundreds of miles away. Our web of culture stretched thin but wide. The Neanderthals, in contrast, lived close, intimate, deeply connected within small kin groups. But between valleys, between mountains, that thread often snapped. Anthropologist Chris Stringer once described this divide as the difference between networks and neighborhoods. The Neanderthals were magnificent within their neighborhoods, skilled toolmakers, empathetic caretakers, close-knit families, but their world lacked the broader net that could catch them when catastrophe struck. When a sickness swept through one group, there were few others to replenish their line. When the ice trapped them, they did not have distant cousins to flee to. Their strength was local, and it became their weakness. Disease, too, played its quiet hand. The meeting of species often means the meeting of microbes. Recent genomic studies suggest that some pathogens, once carried by us, may have devastated Neanderthal populations. Their immune systems, adapted to Europe's cold ecology, may not have recognized tropical infections brought north by our ancestors. Yet irony runs both ways. We, in turn, inherited resistance genes from them, echoes of their immune battles still coursing through our veins. Chance again, silent and unseen, shaping the breath of the living. Then there were numbers, always numbers. Genetic modeling shows that at their height, the total Neanderthal population across Eurasia may never have exceeded 70,000. Entire Europe, forests, rivers, mountain ranges, populated by fewer people than a small modern city. Every birth, every death mattered. When drought came, or game moved, or a single clan vanished, the loss was magnified across generations. By contrast, Homo sapiens, expanding from Africa and Asia, numbered perhaps in the hundreds of thousands. They moved in greater waves, carrying diversity, variation, and genetic resilience. Statistically, the scales were already tipping, one pebble of chance after another. Yet, what if? What if an asteroid had struck Africa's northern coast, stalling our expansion? What if a volcanic winter had cooled the tropics but spared the glacial north? What if one band of Neanderthals had found a river valley rich enough, sheltered enough, to grow and multiply just a little longer? In every corner of history lies a crossroad of luck. Archaeologists speak of population bottlenecks, moments when humanity was reduced to just a few thousand souls. We pass through those needle eyes again and again, any smaller, any slower, and we too might have vanished. Evolution has no script. It writes as it goes, erasing as easily as it creates. To think of it this way is to feel both humbled and connected, to realize that our lineage, our art, our languages, our satellites circling the sky, all began with a coin flip against extinction. But survival is not simply about chance of birth. It's also about flexibility of mind. One subtle factor that may have mattered, and here again, the data is incomplete, the line between science and wonder faint, was adaptability. Our ancestors seemed more restless, more curious, more prone to experiment and move. When ice closed in, they walked. When food ran short, they tried new prey. When landscapes changed, they changed their stories too. Neanderthals were capable of innovation. Their tools, pigments, and crafted ornaments prove that. But evidence suggests their designs remained stable for tens of thousands of years. Perhaps tradition ran deeper. Perhaps, in small communities, the need to innovate was simply less urgent. Yet when the environment turned volatile, those same traditions could become traps. Beautiful, intricate, but unable to shift quickly enough. It wasn't intellect that doomed them. It was inertia, the weight of a way of life that had worked for so long until suddenly it didn't. And still, we must be careful. The temptation to tell this story as triumph is strong, to say that we won. But evolution does not crown victors. It merely leaves survivors. Every species alive today, every bird, every tree, every microbe, is the result of that same brutal lottery. The Neanderthals' end is not proof of our superiority, only of our fortune. Perhaps, if we had met the same winters, the same diseases, the same isolation, it would be our bones beneath their soil, our myths erased by their songs. Chance is not gentle. It does not reward the kind or the clever, only the adaptable and the lucky. And yet, in this delicate truth lies something strangely comforting. To accept that our existence is not ordained but borrowed, that we live on a knife's edge of coincidence, invites humility. It reminds us how precious each flicker of consciousness truly is. In the glow of a modern fire, a lamp, a screen, a candle on a desk, we sit and wonder about them. We read the genome and trace their shadows in our skin. A few % of their DNA hums quietly in our cells, a whisper of that lost world. Perhaps in their final generations, they too wondered. Watching the sky dim over a world they could feel slipping away, they might have asked the same question we do now. Why us? And the answer, even then, would have been the same. Because the wind blew this way, not that. Because a valley flooded. Because a mother survived childbirth one more time. Because chance, that invisible weaver, chose a different thread to follow. Every species, every civilization, stands on such coincidences. Even now, as the climate warms, as oceans shift, as our own numbers strain the balance, we are reminded that the same forces still whisper beneath our certainty. The world is not promised. Survival is never earned once and for all. And so, as the night deepens, imagine again that first meeting. Two fires on opposite sides of a river, one glowing orange, one faint blue beneath the ice. Perhaps they saw each other's faces in the shimmer, human and Neanderthal, not enemies, not destined foes, just two kinds of wonder staring across the dark. One would fade, the other would remain, but both in their way would echo on, one in memory, one in blood. That is the fragile thread of chance, invisible, trembling, and yet it binds everything, from the first spark struck on stone to the faint hum of cities that now light the night sky. It is the same story, the same uncertainty, the same grace. And when we close our eyes, when the hum quiets and the stars return, we may yet hear their breath, not as ghosts of failure, but as kin who remind us, you are here by luck. Walk gently. Night again, the kind that hushes everything, the kind where sound carries softly, where the world seems to fold back into itself. The wind moves low across the steppe, tracing the same cold paths it did 40,000 years ago. Beneath a limestone overhang, a fire flickers, not wild, not fearful, but calm. The same light we began with. The cave is both ancient and immediate, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and stone. Shadows ripple over the walls, the faint outline of hands, of ochre prints pressed by someone who once lived, once loved, once looked upon the same stars that we still see. The flame dances, and in its glow, the distance between us and them collapses. We return to this place not as strangers, but as kin. They were never truly gone, not the way we once imagined. Their story did not vanish. It was absorbed, carried forward, diluted but enduring, like a whisper in water. The bones we find, the tools we unearth, are not relics of failure. They are the earliest verses of our own song. Once they stood where we stand. They looked upon a world raw and magnificent, skies streaked with aurora, rivers glazed with ice, forests filled with the scent of pine and blood. They learned to live not by conquering, but by listening. The rhythm of their days was one of attunement, following the migrations of herds, reading the tilt of the wind, watching the heavens turn. In that patience lies something we have almost forgotten, a deep and wordless knowing of belonging. When we touch the soil now, when we feel the pull of the seasons, a faint echo stirs. The memory of their hands, rough but steady, pressing roots into frost-hardened ground. The same wind that brushed their faces still moves through ours. The same moonlight that silvered their snowfields still glows on our skin. We are their continuation, whether we acknowledge it or not. The fire burns brighter, the wood snapping softly. It is the sound of persistence, of life refusing to dim. And as we sit beside it, the mind drifts back through the long corridor of time, past our cities and our noise, past the ages of metal and empire, back to that fragile thread when two humanities walked side by side. For a moment, both futures were possible. Perhaps in one, they endured. Perhaps they built their own art, their own songs, their own wisdom, quieter, slower, more bound to the rhythm of the earth. Perhaps they learned how to live without severing the roots beneath them. But in this world, it was we who carried the fire onward. We who survived the storms, built languages, shaped stone into meaning. And yet, in every word, every gesture, there remains a trace of them. Their endurance is not in monuments or ruins, but in the pulse that still beats beneath our skin. Geneticists tell us that in almost every person alive today, a fragment of Neanderthal code remains, a thread of ancient inheritance wound into the tapestry of what we call human. Traits of skin, of bone, of immunity, even of emotion. When we feel sudden melancholy beneath a winter sky, when we find comfort in flame and dark, perhaps that too is memory, not ours alone, but shared. We are, in a quiet way, the sum of both dreams. There is a tenderness in that realization. That extinction, as final as it sounds, is not absolute, that what is lost can also transform. In their disappearance, something of them became eternal, not in myth, but in matter. The atoms of their bones drift in the soil, feeding trees that now stretch toward the same heavens they once watched. Their tools crumble into dust, their pigments fade, yet their essence, the will to create, to endure, still breathes through us. To recognize this is to soften. It is to see the continuity that threads through every ending, to understand that the story of life is never a tale of winners and losers, but of exchange, of energy, memory, breath. When we look at the stars tonight, we are not gazing upward alone. We are looking through eyes that have looked before. The cave glows now with a deeper light. Imagine the Neanderthal mother watching her child sleep beside the embers, her face lit by flame. The slow rise and fall of breath, the rhythm of her heartbeat steady as the fire's pulse. Outside, the snow drifts against the entrance, sealing them in warmth and silence. The tenderness of that moment transcends time. In her care, in her small, ordinary act of love, we see the truth that binds all sentient beings, that survival is not born of dominance, but of devotion, that the strength of a species lies not in its tools, but in its capacity for empathy. Perhaps that is what saved us, and perhaps it is what remains of them within us. We often speak of human progress as a ladder, a climb from ignorance to enlightenment. But perhaps it is not a ladder at all. Perhaps it is a circle, glowing faintly in the dark, the firelight of one era becoming the spark of another. The Neanderthals were not our stepping stones. They were our companions in that circle, our reflections, our mirrors in a world that was too vast and cold for either of us alone. When their part of the circle faded, ours brightened, not in triumph, but in inheritance. The philosopher Teilhard de Chardin once wrote, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." Perhaps the same could be said of them, that beneath the fur, the stone, the silence, something luminous moved, something we can still feel if we listen long enough to the quiet between words. Listen now. The wind through the cave mouth hums like breath. The embers settle, glowing softly. There is no tragedy here, only continuity. A calm acceptance that everything that lives must one day pass, and yet, through that passing, renews the world. The fire that warms us tonight is older than language. It has passed from hand to hand, from species to species, from dream to dream. It is the same warmth that once flickered in a Neanderthal hearth, the same pattern of light that shimmered across their eyes. Every time we light a flame, in a home, in a camp, in a lab, in a prayer, we are performing the oldest act of remembrance. We are keeping them alive. Outside, the snow has stopped. The stars reveal themselves slowly, patient and infinite. The world sleeps, but the fire remains. In that stillness, one final thought lingers, gentle, uncertain, but full of wonder. Perhaps in another world, it was they who dreamt us. Perhaps it was their children who watched the dawn and wondered if anyone else was out there. Beings of shadow and breath, distant but kindred. Perhaps, in every dream, the fire still burns for both. And if that is so, then there is no end, only the steady pulse of time, fire to ember, ember to spark, passing endlessly through the hands of those who dare to keep it alight. So rest now. Listen to the silence beyond the flame. Feel the warmth that has travelled through 100,000 years to find you. The night is long, but it is not empty. Somewhere beyond sight, another fire still flickers, and in its glow, two shadows, human and Neanderthal, sit together, watching the stars, unseparated by extinction or time. The fire between them hums softly. The same fire that burns in you, the same fire that remains.